This morning, U.S. officials are warning of the possibility of significant civilian casualties as Russia's invasion of Ukraine enters a second weekend. According to officials, Russians plan to bombard Ukrainian cities into submission. CNN's Natasha Bertrand has more from EU headquarters in Brussels.
John Brianna, NATO Secretary General and Secretary of State Antony Blinken, warning here in Brussels yesterday that the next phase of Russia's operation in Ukraine could be much worse and much bloodier. A senior Western intelligence official telling me yesterday as well that Russia's operations could move into a phase where they begin to bomb cities into submission, moving from targeting military targets primarily to civilian targets and infrastructure. The president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, calling for a no-fly zone, but both the Secretary General of NATO and Antony Blinken saying that currently is not on the table.
All right, joining us now is Gary Kasparov, a prominent Russian pro-democracy activist and chairman of the Human Rights Foundation. Gary, it's always a pleasure to speak with you. I want to get your take on the breaking news first. There had been this promise of a ceasefire in Mariupol right here. The Russians had said they would stop shelling the city to let some civilians out. The Ukrainians are saying the Russians have broken their promise. What's your response to that?
Unfortunately, I'm not surprised. Putin broke every promise that he made in the past. He has a record. Lying is the main trait of his character. So why should we be surprised about, for Putin's standards, a minor violation? He reneged on every treaty, on every agreement he signed, if he saw an opportunity to advance his agenda. So all these ceasefires is just another opportunity for Putin's invading troops to regroup and to continue the advance in Ukraine. Putin's goal has been very clear from the onset of the operation, even before. Ukraine as a sovereign state must be destroyed. And since he's already stumbled and they cannot win the war on the battlefield, he is now attacking civilians. He is going to bombard Ukraine to submission. He's going to destroy Ukrainian cities, and that's why made the decision to wait and not to impose a no-fly zone. It's an open invitation for Putin's Air Force to ground Ukrainian cities.
Then what is left in the end? And Ukrainians have made it very clear this is just shifting them closer to the West.
Look, it's literally shifting them closer to the West because millions of them are running to the West now, trying to save their lives. Yes, when Ukraine prevails, and I believe when, not if, so it will be a strong ally of the free world, and hopefully the Ukrainian victory in this war will lead to changes in my country, and Russia will get rid of Putin's fascist regime and also will become a member of the family of civilized nations. But before it happens, how many hundreds of thousands of millions of lives we have to pay because the free world is still not ready to recognize the fact Vladimir Putin is at war with the civilized world. This is World War III. And all these declarations that we had to avoid military confrontation with Russia, they're just, it's in vain. We're already imposing sanctions on Russia, economic sanctions, financial sanctions, technological sanctions. And why do we expect that the battlefield military confrontation can be avoided? Since Putin made it very clear, he wants to demonstrate to the world that he's in charge. He can do whatever he wants. He can subdue the neighboring country with the rest of the world watching.
Gary, talk a little bit more about that, because obviously what President Zelensky is calling for is a no-fly zone around Ukraine. We've heard from the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg saying it's not going to happen. NATO, they say, will not enforce a no-fly zone or put troops in Ukraine because, as you just mentioned, they say that would invite World War III. But you don't buy their argument.
Look, by the way, let's separate. Nobody's asking for the boots on the ground. So that's a typical, trick. When they want to cover their weakness, they introduce another argument that was not there. We are talking only about no-fly zone. And if NATO is not ready to confront Russia militarily in the skies, how NATO is going to defend eastern flank of its organization? Because I have no doubt that Vladimir Putin, if God forbid he has temporary success in Ukraine, will test NATO resolve in Lithuania, for example. And unless NATO is ready to recognize the fact that this confrontation is inevitable, So then we hear the same arguments that, oh, maybe it's too dangerous. Maybe we have to recognize that, the Lithuanians should probably follow the demands of Moscow of changing their government. So weakness never stops dictators. So it's time to show the resolve, strength. And let's not forget, NATO is the most powerful military alliance in history. And if NATO imposes a no-fly zone, I want to see how many Russian pilots will fly in the skies of Ukraine. Putin can give any orders he wants, but it's about those who will have to carry these orders and risk their lives. I'm not so sure that Russian Air Force has too many kamikazes.
Gary Kasparov, always in education, getting to speak to you. Thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you for inviting me.